Thanks for having me today, Grace. My name is Vishal Subramanyan. I'm a wildlife photographer. Here's a little bit about me. I'm a recent UC Berkeley graduate, and I work as a professional wildlife photographer. So I specialize in using camera traps to document mammalian fauna, and I'm currently working on animals like mountain lions, wolves, bats, and more. So I grew up in the Bay Area and got my start with wildlife photography, right here in the Bay Area. I spent a lot of my high school years photographing animals like river otters, weasels, badgers, owls, and spent a lot of time photographing bobcats. And throughout high school and the early part of college, wildlife photography was just this sort of like self-sustaining hobby for me. I would go out, take some photos, sell some prints, and use it to buy some more camera equipment. And it's just something I would do in my free time. I hadn't really thought about it as a career per se, but being a student in Berkeley and having the access to all the amazing resources and amazing professionals here at Berkeley helped me turn this passion of mine into a career. And I'll be talking a little bit about my journey in Berkeley and how it made this possible. Here's another bobcat image. So I spent a lot of my time in high school and the first couple of years in college photographing bobcats. But one animal I'd always really wanted to photograph in our local hills of the Bay Area was mountain lions. Now, I'd been in their territory a lot, but I'd never seen them. And one year I decided that I really wanted to find one to take pictures of. So I went out with my long lens, my mirrorless camera body, and I spent about 100 days in the hills hiking and searching for them. And I didn't find a single one. So I realized I would have to change up my tactics a little bit if I wanted to get a photograph of a mountain lion. So a lot of us are probably familiar with one of these. They're called camera traps, trail cameras, game cameras, many different names for the same thing. A camera that has a motion sensor which takes a picture when an animal walks by. Now these are really valuable tools for scientists and hobby wildlife enthusiasts to see what wildlife is around, what habitat they're using, what density, and much more. But these trail cameras, they tend to provide low resolution images. They're not the high quality kind of intimate images that we see from those wildlife photographers. So I wanted to try this different technique to take photographs of mountain lions. And that's called using a DSLR camera trap. So this is one of your standard trail camera images of a mountain lion. As you can see, it's, and it's a really cool image, but it's also like an infrared image at night. It lacks color, and it's not really high definition or high quality. But with the DSLR camera trap, you're using kind of a similar technology and framework, except everything's a little more advanced. Instead of like a small camera and sensor, you're using a standard DSLR camera in a wide angle. Instead of an infrared flash, you're using an off-camera white flash, which allows you to capture color images at night. And using these more advanced techniques, you can capture these really high-quality images of wildlife. And while I was an undergrad in Berkeley, I decided that I wanted to use this technique to photograph mountain lions. So this is what one of those setups looks like in the field with all those cards out there. So you can see you've got your camera on the ground, you've got your various flashes placed at various angles, your motion sensor. And as you can imagine, this kind of setup takes quite a long time to set up. So, with all these moving parts, I could spend maybe 3 hours setting one of these up. And because you're doing manual focus, you have to predict where exactly the animal is going to walk. So oftentimes, this involves crawling around like a mountain lion to make sure everything's working properly. Now, this might look silly, but it's a very important part of the process. And in fact, I have way more pictures of myself crawling around like a mountain lion than I do of actual mountain lions. So I needed to figure out where I wanted to set up these camera traps. And you guys just went to Point Reyes this weekend, where UC Berkeley has a field station. And the UC Berkeley Natural Reserve System actually has 5 field stations across California. And UC-wide, there's I think over 40 of them. And these provided a perfect place for me to set up my camera traps because their restricted access to the public for some of them meant that I wouldn't have to worry about the cameras being stolen. And on-site, there was a lot of on-site resources and also data that biologists had already collected in the area would make it possible for me to know where to set up my cameras. So I went to Blue Oak Ranch Reserve, UC Reserve located near Mount Hamilton, and I looked at Google Earth, I mapped out the potential corridors where I expected mountain lions to walk, and I got started in setting my camera traps up here. And one thing I noticed immediately was a big difference in capturing imagery of wildlife with your standard long lens versus a camera trap. So for your image on the left for you guys of the bobcat in the snow, you can see, it's your standard wildlife image, an up-close photo of an animal with a blurred out background. But for the bobcat image on the right with the camera trap, you can see it's able to incorporate a lot more habitat, and you can kind of tell a more encompassing story with these kinds of images. So as I set up these camera traps, I started capturing more images of bobcats, coyotes, foxes, and even an owl. But the mountain lions were still eluding me. But after several months of waiting, I got a butt shot. And another butt shot. In fact, every single time for about 6 months, this mountain lion would always walk the opposite way to make sure I got a butt shot. On another occasion, my DSLR camera fell into the trees, and the trail camera I had recorded the mountain lion jumping on my camera, using it as a stepping stone to cross the creek. Talk about insult to injury. This video has more views than any of my mountain lion photos, by the way. But eventually, I finally got the image I was hoping for, of a male mountain lion crossing the stream as the sun set behind him. Now, at this point, I was still doing this sort of as a hobby, but I realized how camera trapping can be valuable, not just to capture these beautiful images that inspire a sense of curiosity and wonder and awe about our natural world. But it also helps, show wildlife behaviors and capture things that might not have really been seen before. And as I was doing this camera trapping, I was contacted by the director of the UC Berkeley Point Reyes Field Station, who I believe you all met this weekend, Ellen Chabel, to do a different kind of camera trapping project in Point Reyes. Now, Point Reyes is known for a lot of really cool, iconic Bay Area wildlife. You've got river otters, you've got tule elk, you've got bobcats. But this animal we were hoping to photograph was a completely different one. It's called a mountain beaver. These are a really cool, rare species of rodent that actually there's a subspecies found only within the confines of Point Reyes National Seashore. And this is thought to be one of the most primitive rodent lineages in the world. And National Park Service had funded a study by UC Berkeley to study the ecology of these animals. And one of the main jobs with that was setting up high-quality camera traps to see what we could document. And one of the immediate things we discovered by setting up camera traps on the mountain beaver burrows was the amazing community of other wildlife that utilized the burrows. Animals like long-tailed weasels and rabbits. Here's a video clip of a mountain beaver. So this is with a high-quality mirrorless camera trap, which allows us to capture details at night that aren't really possible with their standard camera traps. Another mountain beaver. And we were capturing these all sorts of other animals utilizing the burrows, like this long-tailed weasel, a skunk, and even this short-tailed weasel. This is actually, if you go on iNaturalist, there's only a couple of records of these animals in Marin. We recorded well over 15 detections during our survey. And it goes to show how the camera trapping not only provided this kind of really cool imagery, but also helped us learn about the ecology of these burrows, something that was not known previously. And it really helped us realize that these mountain beavers were actually a keystone species in that local ecosystem for all the other animals that use their burrows. I just completed an analysis and I recorded 29 different species utilizing the mountain beaver burrows. And even this fox was curious about the mountain beaver burrows. So while I was working in Point Reyes, I was also, I heard this really exciting piece of wildlife news. A rare leucistic badger had been spotted in Point Reyes National Seashore. Now, leucism is a genetic condition which results in a palish appearance of an animal. It's a pretty rare condition, and I've only seen it a few times before in like bald eagles, but as far as I was aware, it had never been seen in badgers before, so this was really exciting. This happened to be at a time where I was working in Point Reyes on the mountain beavers, so I thought it would be a good idea to keep my eye out for this badger while I was out there in Point Reyes. One day while I was surveying for mountain beavers, I noticed some fresh badger digs in a nearby field. Now, I had no way of knowing if this was that individual rare badger I was looking for, but it was enough for me to continue to keep an eye out in this area to see if I could find the culprit of these badger digs. one afternoon I was watching a female bobcat in that very field, and as she was hunting in this field this afternoon, she walked by a rock, or what I thought was a rock when I walked by earlier. Except this time I took a closer look and I noticed that that rock had a pinkish nose, some fur. It was actually that rare badger I was looking for. And the bobcat and the badger were only sitting like about 10 feet apart from each other. So I managed to take a couple of pictures of the badger before it disappeared inside its fur. But looking at my photos, I noticed something didn't quite look right. So the hiker who'd seen this badger previously had only snapped an iPhone picture. And there wasn't enough detail to really tell what was going on. But with this more high definition picture, I noticed that it didn't quite look like other leucistic animals I'd seen before. It had this kind of gingerish, more like reddish coloration. So I did a little more research and I found out that this badger was actually more likely erythristic. So this was an entirely new term to me. And it's actually a genetic mutation which results in an overproduction of reddish pigmentation. And it's actually quite a bit rarer than both leucism and albinism. In fact, it had only ever been documented in 2 American badgers before this one, and that was back in 2006 in Washington. So armed with this new information, I decided to spend like my entire holiday season in Point Reyes looking for this badger, from sunrise to sunset. So that's exactly what I did. From 10 days, I was sitting in that field 9 to 5, hoping to get even more photos of this badger. And I can tell you how this went, but I'd rather show you. This was me at the start of the 10 days. This was me by the end of it. Needless to say, it didn't quite go as planned, and that's because American badgers have a really large territory, and it's likely that this field only made up a small portion of that badger's territory. So after 10 days of being rained on, chased by cows, and just generally being pretty miserable, I decided to go home, recharge my batteries, and try again for the badger on the last weekend before the spring 2024 semester started. And as I headed out that Sunday morning, I found the badger curled up in a ball right outside of his burrow, just as I had seen him that very first time. And I immediately got downwind of him, and I waited for about 4 hours, when he finally got up and gave me some of the looks and photos that I was hoping for. He walked through the field to forage, got a little bit of dirt on his face, and he eventually stopped and posed for this picture. And after I took this picture, he started walking straight through the field. And he was walking parallel to this fence line. And about 50 yards in front of him, along that fence line, there was a bobcat. But it wasn't just any bobcat, it was that same female bobcat that had led me to this badger the very first time. And as the badger got closer, he sped up, running straight towards the bobcat, who jumped over the fence and went out of sight. And I don't blame the bobcat. I'd be scared if an angry badger was running at me too. But I didn't get any photos of this interaction because it happened too far away. But it was a really amazing sighting. This photo ended up being my first photo in National Geographic, and it was a really unique way to use photography to learn about this concept of erythrism, something I'd never heard about before, and share it with a really wide audience. And it helped me realize the value of photography for communicating important scientific topics like this one. Now, we're going to pivot a little bit back to the camera trapping. So my work with the mountain beavers and the mountain lions, I got in touch with these 2 conservation groups, these land conservation agencies that were working in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And they were interested in utilizing camera trapping to document wildlife on their lands. Now this would give multiple benefits. One, it helps show their donors and their supporters how protecting and stewarding land in this area benefits all the wild creatures that live there. And it also helps collect valuable data for them for their monitoring and stewardship programs. And for Peninsula Open Space Trust, which is a land trust that's been conserving land in the Santa Cruz Mountains for the last 50 years, I was assigned to a very specific project. Now, they have a big redwoods program to conserve as much of the redwoods as they can, particularly old growth. And my job was to photograph wildlife in the redwoods. Now, I've walked in redwood forests many times before, and I rarely ever saw any wildlife, so I didn't know how this would turn out. But just a few months after setting up camera traps, I was fortunate enough to capture some bobcats, some foxes using the redwoods, and actually just about a week ago, I was at this camera trap set. And I have 1 camera on the lower part of the hill and 2 cameras on the upper part of the hill. I walked by the lower camera, and I had seen that a mom mountain lion and her 2 big cubs had passed by them. However, they walked the wrong way and I didn't get any pictures. So I walked up the hill, I checked my other cameras, which didn't have any pictures on them. And then I spent about a few hours there. And as I came back down, I stopped and checked the lower cameras again. And in the 2 hours that I'd been gone, that whole family of lions had passed by again. They were pretty much right under my nose the whole time. And this time they came the right way. And I was finally able to get the pictures I was hoping for of the mountain lion family walking through the redwoods. Now, in addition to working with land conservation agencies, I was fortunate enough to join a fellowship program with the California Academy of Sciences, where the goal was to use content creation and storytelling to help educate and bring people closer to California's biodiversity. Now, I was working on various projects across the state for this, but the one I would like to highlight to show the power of photography and storytelling to share important wildlife stories with the world was the project to document the Mount Lyell shrew. Now, this might look like a relatively ordinary animal, but until last November, it was the only mammal in California that had never been photographed alive. The only one. So this journey began when I was on a field trip in the mammalogy class here at UC Berkeley. And my friend and I had built this white background photography setup to take photos of the small mammals that we were capturing and studying. And we took photos of these voles and these deer mice. And the setup worked better than we expected. And we thought to ourselves, what could we photograph next? This kind of white background photography is really valuable for scientific context because it helps show the animal with minimal distractions, and they're the kinds of photos that are used in research publications and things like that. So on this mammalogy field trip, we caught a shrew in one of the class's traps, but it ran away. So we really wanted another chance at a shrew photo. And as we did research, we found out that the Mount Lyell shrew was the only mammal in California that had never been photographed alive. So with about a month left before the snow hit, which would have made that area inaccessible, we decided to launch an expedition to try to get the first ever photos of this animal. So that picture on the left is of a dead Mount Lyell shrew. And that's pretty much how almost all shrews are found. Shrews have incredibly fast metabolisms. If they don't eat for every about 2 hours, they'll die. And in the past, when mammalogists have gone out to study shrews or other small mammals, they've just been setting out traps overnight and coming to check them in the morning. And by that time, the shrew is often dead. So because of that, it wasn't even clear if the Mount Lyell shrew had ever been seen alive by a human before. So working with the California Academy of Sciences and with additional support from the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, the MVZ at Berkeley added us to their permit, and the Cal Academy, through the program I was part of, provided funding and support for this project. We headed out to the high historic Sierra Nevada in Boulder Canyon on the first weekend of November, just days before the first snow hit. And we set out pitfall traps, which are traps that are pretty much just cups in the ground. And you put mealworms and a little bit of cat food in them, and that's how you trap the shrews. But we wanted to see and photograph the shrews alive. We wanted to make sure we didn't do any harm to them. So we had to stay up every 2 hours to check the traps, which means over the course of 3 nights and 4 days, we slept about 8 total hours, with temperatures at night getting down to about 15 degrees. This is what that habitat looks like. It's like a high desert and we were trapping in this particular riparian corridor. And we ended up catching about 15 different shrews and 4 different species. So there was the vagrant shrew, the Merriam's shrew, Montane shrew, and of course the Mount Lyell shrew. And the thing is, in the field, these shrews all look quite similar. So we had to take photos of every single one we caught because we didn't know which one was the Mount Lyell shrew. Only weeks later, when we ran genetics, did we know that we had actually caught and photographed the Mount Lyell shrew. And this is a photograph of the Mount Lyell shrew that we photographed in this terrarium that we built to capture it amongst its natural vegetation and surroundings. Now, the goal of this project, similar to the mountain beaver project, was to show the public a species that we don't hear about as much. If we look at, how conservation funding is allocated, the kinds of animals that the media pays attention to, it's often like a kind of small subset, which is like largely charismatic megafauna. Animals that, are always making the news because they're interacting with people in some way, or, these animals we grew up hearing about, like lions and tigers and bears. But if we look at broader trends of biodiversity loss, what we see is species like this one, the Mount Lyell shrew, are the ones that we're losing at the quickest rate. So a climate change assessment published by UC Davis in 2015 shows that the Mount Lyell shrew is expected to lose up to 89% of its habitat by 2080. And the mountain beaver that I talked about earlier is expected to go extinct by the end of the century. Now, without storytelling and public awareness about these animals, they could quietly disappear under the radar without any public attention or awareness, which is why it's really important as scientists and photographers and storytellers to start paying more attention to these often overlooked creatures that we just don't think about as much. In case you were wondering what we were looking like after 4 days in the field, this was it. We were all ready to go home and sleep. So the Mount Lyell Shrew project ended up being my most widely published story. It was covered in all sorts of national media and international media. And what it showed is that people do care about these smaller creatures because they're really fascinating, they're really adorable, and it's time we start paying more attention to them. And because their interest from the public and the interest from the media is there, and it's important that as photographers and storytellers, we start paying more attention to these kinds of creatures. So right now, I've graduated from UC Berkeley and I'm currently working on 4 different projects. I still work with Cal Academy of Sciences on more of this work documenting overlooked species. I work with the 2 land conservation agencies, and I'm working with UC Berkeley's California Wolf Project. So between those 4 projects, that pretty much takes up all of my time as a wildlife photographer. And yeah, a lot of these opportunities were because of things that I was able to do at Berkeley. And one of the really amazing things about Berkeley is that it provides you these resources to take, these like non-traditional career paths. There's no wildlife photography major, there's no wildlife photography job. It's really something that you have to kind of figure out your own path in. And that's really what UC Berkeley gives you the power to do. So I wanted to finish off by talking a little bit about careers in wildlife photography. So my main advice to people who are interested is to shoot as much as you can. Like, it's really important to get as much experience as you can with whatever camera gear you might have, even if it's your phone. In fact, for the shrew videos that we published, all of that was shot with the phone. There wasn't like any high quality cameras used for any of that. And as a photographer, you're most likely going to be a freelancer if you want this to be a career. There's very few jobs out there, if any, for this. So collaboration is everything. You want to work with nonprofits, you want to work with researchers, you want to work with anyone who is interested in collaborating with you and has a benefit from your work. And I think it's really important to also like build a niche, and then eventually you can branch out, but when you're starting off, it's good to be known for something. For me, I spent several years photographing bobcats, and that's what I was known for doing for a long time. And lastly is to start close to home. Pretty much all my work is in California. That's where it's always been. In fact, this bobcat I photographed in the neighborhood was about 4 minutes from the home where I grew up in. So that's pretty much it. Let me know if you have any questions.
I know you spent a lot of time working with bobcats, and you mentioned that one of those is a female, and I was wondering, how do you tell the difference in the field, or is that something you figure out later?
It's if you can get a shot from the backside and the tail is up, you can tell, yeah. Or like if a cat clearly has kittens, you can tell it's a female. Yeah.
Have you ever felt like in any sort of danger out in the field taking these pictures?
Not really. I would say I haven't had any close encounters with animals. I would say the most danger I felt was being chased by someone in San Francisco once. Yeah.
Were you ever tasked with taking photos of invasive animals, like feral pigs, for instance?
No, I haven't been. It is an important thing to document, like how invasive species affect our ecosystems. It's not something I've been personally tasked with, but part of the job is also documenting unpleasant things or things we just don't want to see as much. So one of my main assignments lately has been to document how rodenticides impact wildlife, and it involves photographing coyotes and bobcats with a disease called mange, which is often caused by rodenticides. And I've had to spend a lot of time watching coyotes which have basically lost all of their fur and are pretty much barely hanging on. And it's not a particularly fun thing to do, but it's also an important story to tell. So, yeah.
For the DSLR camera traps you were talking about, did you have to get a separate specific camera for that, or did you just use ones you had on hand already?
For the So for like the first one I built, I had like an old camera that I upgraded from, so it was just kind of sitting around, so I used that. For the rest of the projects I work on, I'll typically buy the cameras with the project budget. So but I'm not like getting new fancy cameras because you don't really need them. So I'm buying cameras, but they're often like used cameras on eBay. Yeah.
How did people know that the type of shrew that you like got a photo of was like existed if they never like people you didn't know people had seen it before?
So in the past, like especially in the Sierra Nevada, so a lot of the work has been done right here at UC Berkeley, particularly by the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. And what they do is these kind of like wide-scale mammal surveys. So they're setting out pitfall traps or like Sherman traps, which are kind of like a trap that clicks closed when an animal walks in. And they're not specifically targeting shrews. They're just trying to catch as many mammals as they can. And this is like museum science, where it's not, they're gonna get a specimen of the animal anyway, like for the museum collection. So to them, it's not really relevant whether it's alive or dead, because they're not like recording behavioral information or natural history information while it's alive. So the Mount Lyell shrew has been caught like about 5 times before we did our expedition. But it was always like, they would go out there and set like 100 traps, and they'd come to a dead Mount Lyell shrew in the morning. So because of that, like they had those dead shrews, which they ran the genetics on, and they're like, oh, this is a different species, this is a Mount Lyell shrew. But they'd never actually like seen it alive or done research on it while it was alive.
So, thank you.
Yeah?
For, I guess this particular shot, you have one there, how would you say far away were you to take that?
This one was a little bit further. I cropped that in quite a bit. I would say it's like 15 to 20 hertz. Yeah.
When you're talking about like your camera setup and everything, with like the flash, is that like also like infrared like triggered, kind of like with the camera, or like is that scare the animal too much, or like I guess how does that work?
So the motion sensor is going to trigger your camera, and your camera has a wireless transmitter which will trigger the flashes. And the flashes don't typically scare the animal because they're put up at like a high height, like well above like eye level, and they're also like pretty low power. So animals often show curiosity about the clicking shutter noise, but they don't really pay much attention to the flash. Yeah, James.
Are there any specific departments here at Cal that have helped you with project funding in the past? Are some of those ones you mentioned?
Funding specifically, like, I would say like most of my funding sources have been external to Berkeley, but I have a couple times gotten funding through CNR specifically. Not as much through I've received like a lot of other great support from the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, but in terms of specific like financial support, it's been mostly through CNR.
What resources on campus did you find the most helpful in navigating like photography and nature and challenges of that?
I would say like I'm not sure if this counts as a resource, but I would say like the main thing was just simply like just trying to get in front of like my professors and graduate students' faces as much as possible, like just going to things like office hours, going to weekly seminars and events, and like just always sending an email after like, hey, great to meet you, great to chat, kind of thing, just to kind of consistently stay on someone's radar. And then just like also like just never being afraid to ask, like, hey, like, do you need any help with this? Can you help me with the permitting on this or something like that? Because professors and graduate students, they do want to help undergrad, so it's about like just putting yourself out there. Yeah.
For that first one you showed with your picture on Nat Geo, did you reach out to them or did they reach out to you? Or how did you get connected?
I'm trying to remember. So for the badger specifically, I have like a list of like media contacts which I pitched if I think like a story would fit. So I pitched them there. For the shrew, it was the Cal Academy's communications team managed it. So it kind of depends on like kind of which group you were working with. Yeah.
Because of how rare badger's genome is, does it have any special protections for children?
It doesn't, like in general, like individual animals like can't really be granted protection under any kind of like state or federal law. But like the individual's location was kept secret, and the articles were only published like well after, well after the photos were taken when nobody had seen the animal for a while.
Great.
Yeah.
How many people like are normally on the team with you when you're going to do these like projects? Like the photograph the species, like how many people?
It really depends. So a lot of stuff I do alone. I would say most of my work is alone. In the case of the shrew project, I did that with a fellow UC Berkeley undergrad and a friend from the University of Arizona. I think it definitely depends on the context. Like if I'm doing something in the Bay Area, it's almost always alone. Like if I'm going on like an expedition like outside of the Bay Area and stuff, I'll usually do it with a few colleagues and collaborators. And for things like the California Wolf project or something, there's like a whole team of people. So it definitely like depends on like the context. But even if I'm going out like myself alone, I'm always like aided by the knowledge of scientists and working with marketers and communicators and stuff.
Just curious if there have been any wildlife photographers or other role models that have been inspiring to you along the way?
Definitely a lot. One of my main mentors who taught me camera trapping was Steve Winter. He took the photo of P22 with the Hollywood sign that many of us are probably familiar with. Locally, there's a really talented National Geographic photographer named Anand Verma, who runs a photo lab not too far from this campus, and he was an undergrad here himself. So I learned a lot from him as well throughout my Berkeley journey. Yeah, so those are just a couple of many. Yeah.
Now that you were able to photograph the mountain lion, like what's the next animal that's like the next goal, I guess?
So yeah, we just received funding and are getting an expedition going to film a species called a tree vole. It's called the Sonoma tree vole, and it's endemic to like the coast range of California. And it's like voles typically like live on the ground; they're pretty common. But here in California and in like the Pacific Northwest, there's an completely unique genus of voles that lives entirely up in the canopy, and they never come to the ground. And they live in old-growth Douglas fir trees, and they eat the Douglas fir needles. So probably when you guys were in Point Reyes, you saw a lot of Douglas fir trees. And they're not found in Point Reyes, they're only found north of there. But it's a really incredibly cool animal and ecologically super fascinating that they live that high up in the canopy. So we'll be actually heading up into the canopy to go film that. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, what you studied at Berkeley and like how you guys, if you apply that and how you apply it.
Yeah, I studied ecosystem management and forestry in CNR, and I also did a double degree in statistics. And I would say neither of them have like particularly applied. It's more just like it's more like, just, I think I really could have done most majors and kind of still ended up connecting with the same people, because I think it's kind of what you do outside of your classes that really helps. Yeah.
Where do you hope to ultimately take your photography career?
I'm not entirely sure. One thing I would like to do at some point is like, whether it's through my own nonprofit or funding from another group, kind of get a project started where we can work to document kind of overlooked and underappreciated species on a global scale. Because California being one of the most well-studied places in the world, there's several species here. Well, the Mount Lyell tree had no photographs, and there's several species which are only known from like a few like really low-resolution photographs. So, and like that's just California, which is one of the best studied areas in the world. If you look at like a global scale, like there's so much biodiversity that we've never really documented well, that most people don't know about, but they're obviously still really fascinating and important. So like some kind of initiative where not only where I could work on those stories, but also fund people in those areas to work on those stories is something I'd be interested in, like long term. Yeah?
Do you have any like fun stories where anyone worked in photograph?
Fun stories. There's a lot. Yeah, I can't think of a single one now. I don't know if this is fun, but one thing I've learned is never set up your camera traps in areas where cows are, because they will knock them down. I learned that the hard way and nearly lost like $5,000 worth of equipment. So there's that. I've spent like several hours trying to cow-proof my equipment. I've brought out like whole like drills and car batteries and everything, and none of it worked. So now I have a no cow policy. Let's see what else. So when we were doing that shrew project, this is also not a fun story, I'm just sharing my miserable moments. When we were doing that shrew project, by the end, like we were all so cold and tired, I was kind of like, just like not fully mentally functioning. And I remember like it was like 3 a.m. on the last night, and I was like sleeping, and I was starting to get up. And then my friends asked me, do you want dinner? And I don't think I processed what they were saying, and I was just saying things like, it's over there, or like, he's laughing, or just like entirely random things. Yeah.
Oh, how was it like taking the mammalogy field lab here?
The mammalogy field class? Oh, it was really great. I highly recommend it. It was definitely like my favorite class I ever took in Berkeley. And that's partially because I love mammals. That's like my favorite taxa group. But yes, they teach it every other year, even year. So it was taught in 2022, it was taught in 2024, which is when I took it last fall. So it'll next be taught in the fall of 2026 and fall of 2028. So, yeah.
What are some of the places and organizations where you've done this presentation before? Like, is making presentations a big part of what you do right now?
Yeah, I do like at least like 3 or 4 public talks a month. And most are similar to this. I adapt it to each, but I've given this talk at the California Academy of Sciences. I've given it for like the California State Parks. And I actually gave this talk, a shorter version of it, to the chancellors of UC Berkeley and UC Santa Cruz, because they were visiting the UC Natural Reserve System, and they wanted to know how these reserves can benefit students. So I gave this presentation to show how the UC reserves played a big role in my career.
Do you have a website or anything where you can like purchase prints or something like that?
Yeah, I do have a website. It's just my name, vishalsubramanyan.com, and I can like share that with Grace.
Yeah, I'll send it out later.
Yeah.
I was curious, obviously you're a wildlife photographer, but you said when you talk to your media contacts that you pitch them a story, and like part of this is about telling a story, like how much in the written aspect of it, like that Nat Geo thing, like how much input do you have in it, or they kind of take it over and just use your photos?
I would say like I do like do writing here and there, but usually they don't want the photographer and the writer to be the same person. So oftentimes I'm sharing photos and just giving a lot of interviews. So I guess my voice is included that way, but I'm not like actually doing writing myself, which I don't mind. I mean, I write my social media captions. That's enough for me.
For running low on questions, I'm gonna put up the attendance code real quick. It's also on the paper over there, but keep asking questions if you still have any.
Are you mostly using like your raw images, or like how much do you edit them, like lighting wise or whatever?
I always shoot in RAW, and I do like your standard edits, like cropping, highlights, shadows, noise reduction, that kind of stuff. But I mean, I try to keep it minimal, just the basics, to improve as much as I can. Oh yeah?
How did you choose bobcats to start?
I was photographing these owls once, and I just had this kind of like mesmerizing encounter where like I was photographing these owls, and I turned around the corner, and I saw this like pregnant female bobcat off in the distance. So that was pretty far away. It wasn't like the mesmerizing encounter. But when I came back months later to see if I could find her with those kittens, since I knew she was pregnant, I saw her with 3 kittens, and she brought a squirrel to the base of a tree, and the 3 kittens jumped out. So that was the mesmerizing encounter that kind of got it started. Yeah.
When you're shooting, do you generally, like, to avoid disturbances, do you put it on a tripod or handheld, or like laying on the ground?
I'm always like, if I'm there taking photos in person, I'm always handheld, and I frequently lay on the ground. both to get a good angle and to minimize my presence. And like my general policy is like if I find an animal, I'm usually on some trail or road, and I'll stay on that trail or road and let that animal like set the distance. Yeah.
Have you ever taken any animals on campus or around campus?
I've not. Wait, let me think. I mean, the closest thing is I've photographed bobcats up in Tilden before, but you know, that's a little bit away. On campus directly, no. I was hoping at some point I could set up camera traps on campus, but it's just far too risky, like at least for the higher end camera traps.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you ever want to expand, or do you know anything about like ocean photography or like marine animals?
It's definitely something I want to get into. I do a lot of tide pooling just in my own time, just for fun. But it's like, it's a whole new skill set and it requires like a big like gear purchase investment. So it's something I see down the line for sure. And especially if we're talking about like underexplored biodiversity, like the ocean is obviously the frontier for that. It's something I see down the line, but not in the near future. Yeah.
Are there any countries or ecosystems that you like that are kind of at the top of your list to visit more internationally?
This is a good one. Southeast Asia for sure is pretty high on the list. There's a lot of species I want to see there. I'm really fascinated with central Chile because there's this one really cool marsupial that lives down there that I really want to see. And then also like eastern Tanzania and like the Congo Basin has a lot of elephant shrews, which I love.
What's the marsupial?
What?
What's the marsupial?
It's called a Monito del Monte, and it's a really fascinating marsupial because South America has over like 100 marsupial species, and they're mostly members of the Didelphidae family, which is the same family of the one opossum that we have right here. But this Monito del Monte is actually like part of such an ancient lineage. It's more related to all the Australian marsupials than it is to the South American marsupials. And fossils from that family have actually been found in Antarctica, like back when like Pangea was a thing. So it's a really, really unique animal. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Nat Geo like person, like who like those pictures for Nat Geo?
Probably Steve Winter, who took the photo of the mountain lions in Southern California. He does a lot of camera trap work on big cats, and that's like partially what got my interest in like camera trapping mountain lions.
That's awesome. Thank you. So